Hello, everyone, and welcome to two different segments. This is the segment for the Portuguese-American Hour that we've been doing for quite a while now, our history segment with Dr. Monique Kelly-Valance, PhD in Portuguese history from the University of California in Santa Barbara. And besides this being our regular segment for the Portuguese-American Hour, as far as the audio is concerned, we are also doing this as a recording on video, as you can see. And we will have a presence. So every single week, we'll have a presence of the Portuguese American Hours history segment through Facebook and through our PBBI YouTube channel, PBBI-Fresno State YouTube channel. So thank you, Monique, for agreeing to, I should say, Madam Doctor. Let's not let's do that. I'm very big on titles because, as people may or may not know, it isn't an easy thing getting a master's or a PhD. So it's you pay a lot of dues in order to get those degrees, and
Yes,
and you learn a lot, but there's also a lot of dues that you pay.
definitely.
It's a long process, isn't it, Monique?
It is, and can be stressful at times. I mean, I love it, but the end is probably the most stressful.
Indeed, indeed. And so let's talk a little bit today. What are we going to learn as far as our history segment? Every single time we learn something different.
Well, today I thought we would talk about Henry the Navigator.
Oh, the
Yes,
icon,
knowing
the icon, the icon.
right, the man, the myth, the legend, as I like to say.
There you go.
He is, and we've talked about him before in the past, but I'm going to talk a little bit about a different aspect of him. And this is kind of something, it's hard because probably Henry the Navigator and, Dom Henrique, the Príncipe Henrique, the son of Don Juan the First, he definitely has hit mythical status. He's probably like George Washington as far as, the way we perceive him. And a lot of that has to do actually with the really the last couple hundred years. We know him as a navigator, and kind of what I'm going to talk about today is really what Henry wasn't a navigator, but he was a crusader. He was really more interested in going to North Africa and fighting with the Moors than he was actually, navigating. And just for people to know, he never actually navigated anywhere. So, his name is actually a product of the British in the 19th century. They because what was happening was he had these British historians at the time. Britain was probably the most powerful empire in the entire world, and they looked at Portugal and they said, how is it that this little country was able to beat us out into the explorations? How was that possible? There's just no way. And then in researching his genealogy, they noticed that his mother was English, Philip of Lancaster. They said, oh, that's it. Okay, now we can sleep better. It's because he's English. Okay, so so they really didn't beat us, kind of. And so this moniker, the Navigator, kind of came out of this, and the Portuguese government at the time, the king, and then eventually Salazar, really, jumped on this and ran with it, because even though, as I said, he wasn't really a navigator, this kind of made Portugal look good. We could focus on, our glory days and kind of the great things that we did for the exploration. So Dom Henrique is if you read high school textbooks, junior high textbooks, even college textbooks, there actually are a lot of myths about Henry that get published in these textbooks and drives me crazy. So kind of what I'm going to talk about today is sort of Henry as the man and what Henry really did and that kind of thing. So of course I could talk about this for days, but I'll shorten it to our segment time.
So there's of course, as always, and I don't know why we do that in history and in other aspects, but it seems like we teach something in elementary, and then we teach something in high school, and then we have to relearn it all over again
in college.
in college. So
Right.
So there's some misconceptions and misinformation that is being put out by Henry
Yes.
in especially in American textbooks. Let's put it
right. And I think part of the problem is that Portuguese history is such a specialized field, you don't really have that many people who are experts in Portuguese history out there, even in Portugal. So that's a problem. At one time I did a review of a textbook. They sent me a chapter for me to review it, not to actually go through and credit. And I wrote pages and pages about what they wrote about Portugal, because half of it was wrong. They never called me again after that. But it's because, if you're a French historian, you don't really know much about Henry, and this is what we've always learned. So we just kind of keep perpetuating the myths, and there aren't really that many voices out there to say, hey, this is wrong. This is actually not what happened. My good friend Brian Martins, he used to teach history in junior high, and he one time sent me this out of his textbook. He said, "Oh, so Henry had a navigational school in Sagres." I said, "No, he didn't." He goes, "What? But that's what my textbook says." Well, no, that's not right. So, it's hard to fight.
That's right.
These things.
Well, let's learn the one aspect of the real Henry
Right.
the Navigator.
Okay, so just for a little bit of background for those, just so we kind of know what we're talking about. So Henry was the son of Longchamp, as I mentioned, and he was born in 1394. He's the third son of the king. So, the third son of the king, the third son of any nobleman in the medieval age period, usually went to the military. So the second son would go to the church, and the third son would go to the military. So Henry kind of did follow that path. He would become the Master of the Order of Christ. And he's definitely see a crusading spirit in Henry. But in my opinion, Henry's main goal at the bottom of everything was to make money. I mean, you kind of can't blame the guy, right? Because he was the Duke of Viseu, but he'll never be the king because he's got a lot of people in front of him. And kind of like if Harry wouldn't become king, but he has a better chance than Henry did. So he's got to make his own fortunes. He can't live off his brother his entire life. And the Crusades definitely had a religious element as far as Christianity versus Islam goes, but at the heart of all of that was these guys trying to get land. Land equals power. Land equals armies. Land equals money. And so the more land you can grab, the more that you can get. And what easier way to do it than to take it from people from a different religion under the banner of Christianity and saying that we're taking back this for the Christians. So, the first Crusades started in the Holy Land, right? Because we're taking it back from the Muslims. But by the time we get to the 1400s, the late 1300s, we're talking about now taking it from people of North Africa who were also Muslim. And in Portugal's case, we haven't started on the explorations just yet, because of course Henry is the one that funds all of those beginnings. But the idea, the Muslims are the ones that controlled all of the trade routes at this time. So they had something called the Silk Road, and it started from China, would go either across Asia, Central Asia. Then they would go either over the Himalayas or through the Gobi Desert, then go all the way to Constantinople. And then from there, take a ship usually to Venice and then go there from Europe. So because of that, goods were extremely expensive. And the Arabs had cornered the market on these trade routes. So they were the ones who controlled everything. And so Henry, I really believe that, this crusading mentality he had didn't have as much to do with religion as it had to do with trying to take control of these trade routes away from the Muslims and away from the Arabs so that Portugal could control it. I mean, and he had no way of knowing that really the ocean was going to be the way and not so much trying to take control of the land routes. But of course, that's a different story for a different day. So he was born in 1394, and by 1420, he was the Master of the Order of Christ. So by the age of 20, Henry was already kind of, ready to go. And we look at 20 as a, college kid, but 20, he was a man, and he convinced his father to allow him to mount an expedition against the Muslim port of Ceuta. Now, Ceuta was a very, very important city in North Africa, which is in today's Morocco. And this was definitely a big hub for the Arab traders. And so in Henry's mind, if we can take Ceuta, then we will have corner the then Portugal could take control of this really important trading city, and then Portugal would see the benefits, and of course he would, because he was the one that instigated it. So to back up a little bit, so at this time, and it's kind of interesting that João was even agreed to this, because initially, João had planned a tournament. Now, as we've talked about in previous segments, Portugal is always kind of at odds with Castile. Usually we're trying to invade them, or they're trying to invade us. And João had actually, we talked about that, the Battle of Ajubarrota in 1385. And then João was able to sign a peace treaty with Castile. And so in 1411, and so João decides, okay, let's have a tournament to celebrate all of this. And instead, Henry says, why don't we go attack Ceuta, Dad? And somehow, João agreed, which is amazing. And the king's treasurer helped too, because he said, if we grab Ceuta, then we'll be able to this will give us all this money. You can always have tournaments later. Then you'll have more money to have more tournaments. So they prepared for 2 years, and they're looking at this as, a crusade. And that's how they're getting people to get involved in this. So in 1415, the Portuguese fleet attacked Ceuta, and they took the port. So in theory, this would have been a great idea. Mm-hmm. However, what Henry couldn't foresee, and probably nobody could have foreseen this, especially from their mindset, is that the grabbing of Ceuta was not a good thing at all, because they didn't trade within Ceuta because it was Ceuta. They traded because they knew they had their contacts there. Once the Portuguese took over Ceuta and kicked out all of the Arabs then went traded somewhere else. And so after this, Ceuta is actually going to be a huge, huge albatross around the neck of the Portuguese monarchy, because they're going to keep it, right? Because we took it, we got to keep it. We can't let it go, and we can't let the Arabs win, and we can't just abandon it and say, oh, well, we made a mistake, so we've got to keep it. But it costs so much money to defend Ceuta, and it costs so much money to send supplies over there. And that's why finally, Dona Luisa de Guzmão finally lets go of Ceuta and gives it to the British. And of course, Portuguese people were really upset about this, but it was the smartest thing she could have done, because for 250 years, it didn't really do much for the Portuguese at all. So it was more of a hey, look at us, we did this, rather than any kind of a practical, benefit to the Portuguese at all. Mm-hmm. So, and this is not going to be Henry's only, attempt. But after this, I think João really looked at Henry and said, because Henry actually wanted to go crusading again. And one of Henry's biggest obsessions was the Canary Islands. It's a group of islands in north of Africa. Castile had taken over the Canary Islands, which they contained a native people that actually they exterminated every single native person off of that island, called the Guanches. And for some reason, Henry was just obsessed with gaining control of the Canary Islands. But he wanted to launch more crusades. And João, at this point, is now skittish. After what happened to Ceuta, he says, I really don't think this is a good idea. So he really doesn't let Henry have his way. And Henry ends up, and this is why Henry then goes and decides to start focusing on funding these expeditions, rather than, because he couldn't crusade. And so he thought, well, at least if I can get these people to start exploring the oceans, maybe we can find another way to subvert the Arabs. And of course, that all ends when, his brother Duarte becomes king later. And then they have the catastrophic problem of Tangier. So after João dies, Henry convinces Duarte to let him attack Tangier, which is another city in Morocco. And this was disastrous. We've talked about this in the Portuguese-American Hour before. For those of you who want a more detailed discussion of this, you can go back to our archives. But we, when all was said and done, the Portuguese pretty much had to retreat, leaving Henry's younger brother Fernando behind. And he took the son of the Moroccan governor back to Portugal. And I think they were hoping for some kind of exchange of hostages. And what ended up happening is Fernando ended up dying in a Moroccan prison. and they never came back for him. So that was kind of a disaster.
Fernando o Mártir, as we learned in Portuguese history.
Yes,
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 the martyr
yes.
of the Inclitas song, of that generation of those four guys. So
Right,
he was the martyr for probably the wrong reasons.
right, right. So really what we learned is like Henry is just terrible at crusading. He should have just stuck to what he knew, which was, and I mean, I don't want to downplay Henry's importance in exploration. So of course he's very important, right? He's the one that funded the expeditions that discovered the Azores Islands, the Madeira Islands. He never was able to get control of the Canary Islands, but his because of our dispute with Castile over the Canary Islands, they actually convinced the Pope to decree a bull that said, okay, so the Canary Islands are going to belong to Castile. So Portugal had to, lay their hands off of the Canary Islands, but Portugal had the right to sail south of the Canary Islands. And if any other country was caught sailing south of the Canary Islands, they would be excommunicated from the church, which is like, that's a big deal. And this is really what gives Portugal the edge over going down the coast of Africa, because I mean, other countries did it in secret, but no one could talk about it because they didn't want to cross the Pope. And so that's actually, so yes, Henry wasn't a navigator, but definitely his importance was more in the promoting the navigational side of the Portuguese Empire, or the beginnings of these explorations. And definitely, even though he would rather be, I think maybe he imagined himself as this warrior for Christ, and I'm going to go out and defeat all the Muslims, and in exchange I'm going to make tons of money. And that's not how it worked out. So definitely an interesting character, Henry.
Yes, an interesting concept of mixing religion with money. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, right.
Well,
so yeah, this time it definitely didn't work.
Indeed. And so we are up on our time, but thank you so much, Dr. Monique Kelly Valance, for this look at Henry the Navigator, who, as you said, it's not to play down, but it's just to look at him with a realistic view. We do that a lot, whether it be in Portuguese history, British history, American history. We have a tendency, we only have a couple of minutes, but do you feel that that we are getting a little bit more into a new realm, or as a society, not just, of course, not from an academic aspect in college, and master and PhD programs, but obviously at a societal level, with everyone in society? Do you feel that we are going in a trajectory that kind of allows for this kind of look at Henry the Navigator, or any other mythical, figure that, is a real historical figure, but there's a lot of myth around it? That goes a lot with everything. I mean, we love to mix myth with historical figures, even somebody from the 1960s or 70s, not that long ago.
Right.
But do you think that society is open to looking at these things with a little bit different eyes than maybe my generation was, 40 years ago or 50 years ago?
I would say yes and no. I think there's definitely a growing population of people who want to look at history from a realistic perspective. And I think, the way that we tend to, I think part of the problem is that, we have, and this is not to discount teachers at all. I think I greatly admire kindergarten through 12th grade teachers, because if it was me, I would kill them. So I think that the fact that they do so much work, and I know that, and I know you used to be one of them, but now you're in college, but, I think it's amazing what they're able to accomplish with these children. But as far as history goes, the thing that bothers me, especially in the high school realm, is that you have people teaching history who may not necessarily even have a degree in history.
Sure.
And they're teaching from the textbooks. So if the textbooks start out wrong, then it's not their fault. They teach what the textbook says. And most people want to trust the textbooks are correct. And then there's a tendency to, I think, simplify certain subjects, maybe to make it more palatable for children, or just because for the sake of time, because we do try to cram a lot of information in 1 year. But at the same time, it's like, there's not really this, like, I think that even if people want to look at history critically, we just really can't, because they're not being taught it from a critical aspect, as far as trying to look at people's intentions, or looking at the other consequences of people's actions, things like that. They're just sort of being taught dates, names, and dates. And I think that kind of takes away from this like more critical perspective. But also, I think we have a lot of people, even now, even in my generation, and I think even to an extent in the younger generation, of people who are afraid of looking at it from a realistic point of view because they're afraid that it somehow takes away from the greatness of what they perceive to be the greatness of our country or of any country. And, we just kind of have to get away from that.
Indeed. Great people have faults like everyone else.
Yes.
And they may have accomplished great things, but they have faults also.
Right.
That's something that we like to have great people be great at everything they do. I mean, they even eat their peanut butter jelly sandwiches in a great way that we don't
Perfect,
eat it the same way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and really what I think is bad is why this is a bad thing is because I feel like the generations that are coming after us are being told they're internalizing this idea that failure is not an option. If you fail, then that's it. And I can't ever fail. And so, like, even in my last years of teaching, I would hardly ever have kids come to my office to ask questions, even if they needed to ask, because they're embarrassed that they have to even ask. And so we need to be promoting that these people were flawed, because even though they were flawed, they still did great things.
Correct. And with that, we will end this segment of the Portuguese-American Hour. Now, also here on YouTube and Facebook Live and all of the other social media outlets. So you'll be hearing us on our editions of the Portuguese-American Hour on radio, KGST, AM 1600, but you'll also be able to see us on a weekly basis here through the various platforms that are available to us. Thank you so much, Dr. Monique Kelly-Valance, PhD in Portuguese history from the University of California in Santa Barbara.